we now begin session 4, Understanding Carbon Neutrality, the first session following our opening ceremony. We will start with a presentation titled Pathways to Carbon Neutrality, Global Perspectives. So let's now welcome our speaker, Dr. Mahmoud Tonkara, Regional Director, Middle East and North Africa, Global Green Growth Institute, to begin the presentation.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today to share some thoughts and ideas on carbon neutrality, but also linking it to the topics, the main theme of this Regional Green Economy Forum. I would like to congratulate our colleagues and friends from VGO for organizing this very important session. The Global Green Growth Institute and VGO have a partnership agreement in advancing the green growth ambitions of our member states and partner states. But as you know, whenever we have a gathering like this, it's about knowledge sharing. It's about also dialogue. And it's about discussing ways to accelerate the delivery of the ambitions set by countries. For that to happen, the government of Morocco has kindly accepted to host us here in Tangier, the beautiful city of Tangier. And I will try as much as possible to make it a dialogue, not a one-way flow. And please come up with as many questions as you would like, understanding that I'm presenting, but all together we are going to have a dialogue on carbon neutrality. You heard a lot earlier in the opening session on neutral cities. You heard a lot earlier today on carbon neutrality. Later on, you will hear more on carbon finance, how that play a role into this process of supporting but also accelerating the delivery of neutral carbon cities. But let me take you back a few years ago on when we started back in 2018, 2019, talking about carbon neutrality. For most of the people who were involved in the discussions, whether mostly it was at the state level, country levels, the discussions were on how do we get to a state where we kind of balance the carbon emissions in a country. A state where we can say that we negate the emissions of carbon dioxide. That's where the conversation started. And then for some of you who may remember, a lot of negating or reducing to zero the carbon emission, the terminology that became popular is the net zero. Carbon neutrality, net zero. So net zero emission has been driving the conversations for the past few years. The first major forum where we had serious discussion on carbon neutrality was at the Climate Ambition Alliance. September 2019, for some of you, for some of us who were at the United Nations Climate Summit in New York. So this was the first global forum that was established to look at carbon neutrality in a structured way. But it was more around creating a movement, creating a momentum, and then building the understanding that this is something serious that we need to be moving forward with. The president of COP25, the Chilean president, was pushing for making sure that we get the carbon neutrality on the global agenda. So the Climate Ambition Alliance took it as one of the key topics to mostly mobilize countries, governments, but at the same time understanding that they will not be able to do it alone. And they needed the private sectors. They needed foundations. So soon after the climate summit back in September 2019, a new movement started that we refer to as the race to net zero. As many of you are familiar with, for the past 20 or 25 years, quite often we have situations where countries or institutions, they just brand to be, oh, I was the first to do this. I was the first to submit my NDC. I was the first to submit the National Adaptation Plan. The net zero movement was not an exception to that. The first country in the region to submit the net zero or to pledge for net zero, or the first private sector company to pledge for the net zero. So we got into that race, the race to net zero, that we were all happy with. I remember back in 2019, we started a campaign in South Korea when I was at the headquarters of GGGI, Global Green Growth Institute, and we call it Net Zero and Blue Skies. Maybe some of you, those who live here in Morocco or in other countries, may not be impacted that much. But for people who live in some countries in East Asia, Southeast Asia, or even South Asia, seeing the blue skies sometimes is very difficult. For example, in wintertime, we used to see the government turning off some of the fossil fuel-driven electricity production units because of the air quality pollution. So living, for example, in South Korea, we were used to using the mask before even knowing that COVID would hit. And when COVID hit, it was easy because we were using the mask 3-4 months a year because of air pollution. So the Blue Skies and Net Zero campaign was meant to actually raise awareness, but also help to push the government to make a commitment on the net zero. So that was part of the race to net zero. As soon as China confirmed its commitment to net zero, 2 or 3 weeks after, it was Japan. And then a few days after, it was South Korea. So that was part of the race to net zero. And then by the time we got to Glasgow COP26, a new movement also started there on the Financial Alliance for Net Zero. As I mentioned earlier, there was a consensus that governments alone will never be able to do it. They need the financial institutions to get on board. And one of the, some of you may be familiar with, we call it the Net Zero Tracker. So whenever you go to the Net Zero Tracker, you will see that currently we have hundreds of cities, countries, and thousands of companies that sign up for net zero. So in a way, we went from the question mark of what is it, what are the implications, is it possible, to a stage where the net zero commitment became the norm. But then there is a key question. To what extent actually the commitment, the pledges in net zero are going to take us to delivering on the key climate and green growth ambitions? When the movement started, many campaigners, many international organizations were and are still skeptical about the results of net zero pledges. One thing is to pledge. But then campaigners will say, well, actually you are pledging for something that will happen 30 or 40 years from now. What actually is true about this and how it can happen? So that took us to looking at all the pledges and seeing what these pledges are going to take us to. So some of the analysis show that when you put all the the nationally determined contributions together, the long-term low emission development strategies, and the net zero pledges together, we still don't reach the 1.5 degree Celsius of the Paris Agreement, which is the target, the reason why we went into the net zero commitments. We also have hope because some optimistic analysis show that we can get close to 1.5 at about 1.8 degrees. That gives us hope. So there is hope that we may be able to get close to it. But it won't be easy. And that's where it's very important, and I would like to take you to a few ideas here, and very much welcome your thoughts as we build on what we call a good practice or best practice model, but also learning from something that recently impacted all of us, that is the COVID-19. If you remember, when COVID hit, and on March 11, internationally it was declared as a pandemic, it took less than 6 months for governments from advanced economies, developed economies, to mobilize close to $13 trillion in less than 6 months. It means that the issue is not the lack of capital. The money is there. The issue is not the lack of capital or the lack of funding. It's the political will. And the same political will that took us to having the net zero campaigns or the race to net zero, the same political will showed us during COVID that they can mobilize the funding. So what we in GGGI, together with some partners like the Green Climate Fund, also based in South Korea, what we did was to help countries, or some of the countries, 29 of them, to find a way to green the recovery. Because the biggest risk at that time was that the billions or trillions of money raised, unfortunately, there was a risk of doing business as usual, staying in the comfort zone. So greening the recovery, I'll give you 2 examples before going deeper into this slide. Mexico and Indonesia. So when you talk to governments, at that time, job loss was the biggest risk or the biggest fear. The number 1, number 2, and number 3 priorities for most governments would be job creation. Creating job, creating job, creating job. So what we did with the government of Mexico and the government of Indonesia was to look at the green recovery package that they managed to pull together and to help them design how to green that recovery. And by doing that, we came up with 2 conclusions. One was that by just shifting away from fossil fuel development and replacing by renewable energy, Indonesia was able to create more than 1 million jobs just by shifting into renewable energy. And I give you another example, which is Mexico. The government of Mexico had a similar exercise of looking at what are the opportunities in terms of greening the recovery. Because the risk for most economies was to have, I wouldn't call it easy money, but the money was raised so quickly that they get indebted and they will spend the next 20, 30 years reimbursing that money. The debt, the service of the debt, and the risk of default. So Mexico got to the same conclusion that for Mexico it was different. It was about delivering on the NDC. So in a way, countries, by moving into net zero, started to understand that the nationally determined contribution they submit should not be seen only as an international commitment. The NDC makes economic and business sense. That's where the private sector comes in. Beyond going to the UNFCCC and submitting the NDCs and then asking, how am I going to finance it? to shifting around and say, by delivering my NDC, how many jobs I can create, and at the same time delivering on the climate ambition. So this is linked to the theme of this Regional Green Economy Forum, which is how do we move forward in accelerating the delivery of neutral cities ambition. The question that was raised, or the campaigners questioning whether these net zero are really realistic, are doable, well, there is one response to that, which is how do we make these net zero, or can we make these net zero credible? And I give you a few examples. If I take the case of South Korea, for example, the net zero 2050 mid-century commitments pledge, South Korea enacted it into a law. So going from the pledge to making it a policy and enacting into law is one of the key steps that we have seen has made a big difference. And if you are familiar with the technology or the industries in some of the countries like in Japan or South Korea or in Gulf states, you will see that the private sector, particularly in Korea, they move fast. Once there is a government decision on something, they systematically take it and say, how can I translate this into an opportunity? So the net zero becomes a way to say our industries. The first meeting I remember we had was with LG and Samsung. I don't know if you know that Samsung is the third producer of cars. We have Samsung on TV or phones. Many of you probably have Samsung phones in the room. But personally, 6, 7 years ago, I was surprised to see that Samsung is a third producer of vehicles in Korea, after Hyundai and Kia. So the private sectors like Samsung or LG, just to give that example, but they exist in other countries as well. The first thing they were saying was, okay, GGGI, you with other institutions, how can we work together to deliver on the government ambitions? So they don't see the policies as something that will impact them, but they see the policies as an opportunity to make business, to make the net zero delivery as a business. But there is another aspect to this, which is why we have thousands of companies from North America to the Middle East, to Europe, to Asia. Thousands of companies started to realize that if they don't green the portfolio, they will end up with stranded assets. That's even worse. So in a few years, they may not have shareholders interested into investing in that portfolio anymore. So that's another dimension. Making the net zero pledges credible, it requires that for mid-century or for some countries like India, for example, they went to 2070. Making the net zero credible requires that at least the short and medium-term deadlines, or by the end of 2025 for when we were discussing the net zero a few years ago, or by the end of 2030 as we are now submitting the NDCs, having the short-term targets that are ambitious enough, that gives some credibility to the net zero. And this is also the time when we are starting to talk about post-SDGs. 5 years from now, we don't have the SDGs anymore, or will not have the SDG, at least in the current form. So beyond 2030, some countries started to say by 2035, they set targets. So in a way, when you look at the net zero pledges translated into policies, into strategies, or into roadmaps, that gives some credibility to the net zero. And there is another aspect to this, which is the opportunity to mobilize finances. And that's where the neutral cities, I think, will benefit a lot. For the past few years, governments at the central level have been deciding on policies, but we have not given enough space to the local government, to the cities, into delivering on their city development plans or playing their role. From one country to another, you have it can be different. If you take a country like UAE, where VGO is based and where GGI regional office is based, you have the emirate level where a lot of ambitious actions have been taken. Earlier today, our brother Masamba mentioned the example of Dubai, daring, showing the biggest thing we can do, or being the first in delivering on one of the most ambitious examples. So from one country to another, you have different scenarios. But local governments, whether it's at the provincial level or city level or regional level, they can play their part when it comes to net zero delivery. So I touched on a number of these topics on central level. We are very much familiar with that. The government's owning the decision to go and pledge for net zero. The government owning the decision to embed greening the financial sector into their development ambitions. At the same time, there is also one fundamental principle in net zero delivery. No single government institution can do it. From Minister of Finance to Minister of Economy to Trade to Housing to Industries, they can all play their role. If you take the cement industry, for example, they consume a lot of fossil fuel for energy production. But some of the solutions we have developed with some of the cement industries is the RGEF, using waste for energy production. And the cement industry, basically, they shift the situation in countries like Vietnam or Cambodia in a way that the feedstock even becomes an issue, because they shift from using fossil fuel to actually using solid waste for the production of energy. And the solid waste feeding, the feedstock becomes a challenge because they need a huge volume. So in a way, the zero waste ambition of the government becomes a reality by integrating the waste to energy into the production of energy for the cement sector, just as an example. So it shows that the circular economy can be an opportunity for companies if they sign up for the net zero. So let me take us to the city level. The theme of the RGEF for this year is on neutrality in carbon neutral cities. Local governments, quite often, the perception for many local governments is to see the central government decisions are as instructions or commitments. But taking those into, or shifting away from the perception of commitments to actually translating them into opportunities for development. That is the key for most cities, the opportunities for development. The question of funding will always be there, and I will touch on that in the next few seconds. One of the success stories when it comes to financing for net zero has been on blended finance mechanism, blended finance instruments. Many of you are certainly familiar with it. When you take a city-level green bond issuance, for example, or a city-level development plan, and they need financing, whenever there is a risk or perception of risk to the investments, it makes the fund mobilization very difficult. So what we have done in a number of countries and for cities, regional level, is to see how blended finance instruments can actually bring the de-risking mechanism into the investment. The Green Climate Fund is a good example of that. So the blended finance helps to actually unlock the private sector capital, particularly the local banks. When you have a de-risking instrument built into the blended finance, it helps to cover the first loss. Let's take, for example, the SMEs. Oh, we are in Morocco. Let's take the example of Morocco. And then you will see that a lot of SMEs or startups, we have talented young professionals who want to start their own SMEs. But the first challenge they will face is the difficulties in accessing conventional funding system. because their companies as a startup don't have the track record. They don't have maybe the 2 or 3 years of expense or financial record that they need to show to the bank. They don't have the guarantee. And that, unfortunately, is repeated in so many places where SMEs and MSMEs are struggling to access the funding. Some of you may also be familiar that the largest economy, for example, in Europe, Germany, the largest economy in Europe, the whole, I would say, economic structure is supported by the SMEs. The SMEs, they represent one of the key foundations of the economy in Germany. Because they are very important. All the large companies, they depend on those SMEs. You go to Asia, you find the same scenario. You have so many SMEs that are working and that are accessing funding because the large companies rely on them. The reason I'm taking this one is to say that at the city level, a similar, I would say, scenario can be envisioned to have blended finance instruments for city development. And that means having de-risking instrument built in there. If the city wants to invest into renewable energy, but then there is a perception of risk, by having a de-risking instrument in the blended finance, the first loss coverage can help the local banks to actually open up credits because they know that if there are issues, the first loss is covered by the guarantee mechanism. We have done it with the Green Climate Fund. We have done it with Finland, for example, to give you 2 examples. And I'm saying that because over the next couple of days, we will be talking about financing. How do we finance the ambitions, the development ambitions of the cities? Now, there are 2 very important aspects. Masamba, you touched on this earlier. How do we make sure that we don't look at only what we are used to doing, but we look at the needs, and we design our ambitions based on the needs? So in a way, we minimize the impossible in our vocabulary. The net zero delivery or the neutral cities is going to become the term I use, which is the art of the possible. The art of the possible. Unfortunately, we know that local government leaders quite often are limited in time frame. The election in 3 or 4 years, or the term ending in 5 years, but that should not be guiding the development plans. That should not be guiding the level of ambitions. And that takes me to 2 very important aspects. One is the speed of the implementation and the magnitude of the challenges that unfortunately do not match with the level of ambition that we set. So quite often, when it comes to the speed of implementation, what took, for example, a city like Jeju in South Korea 10 years to deliver on their green growth ambition, it should not take Tanger the same 10 years. How can Tanger learn from Jeju and then deliver in 2 or 3 years? That's the speed of implementation. Learning from how they did it, we can get to the same result, but we don't need to go the same pathway. So that's number 1. Number 2, and this is linked to the next 2 slides that I have left. I mentioned on the green recovery. So number 2 is linked to how do we aggregate. So aggregation is something that we have done a few times in small island states like in the Pacific. Because when you package the investment pipeline, quite often you have investors that may not be interested because simply it's too small. So aggregation becomes a way, and that's where I think UCLG can benefit from it, is that when you have a project that is small or the ambition from a city that is small in a specific sector, the aggregation helps you to have a pipeline, an investment pipeline that is attractive enough for investors. An investor is spending 1 month or 2 months on a project or an investment document for $10 million quite often is the same time and effort they spend when it's $100 or $200 million. So when it's small, unfortunately, it cannot be attractive for some investors. So aggregation becomes one of the solutions or ways to look at. I touch on these aspects of the lesson learned from green recovery. One thing that I would like to touch on to add to this one is, so we did another assessment. We have the net zero pledge for mid-century, and we have the NDC delivery. But the assessment that we made show that even if you bring all the funding that the cities they need today, the biggest risk they have is the capacity to absorb and deliver on the funding. Let's say today we address and resolve the issue of funding. We will not be able to deliver. We have the money, we'll be sitting on it, we won't be able to deliver. And one of the reasons, and that was the result of the assessment, one of the reasons is what we call the skill gap. The green skill needed to deliver on the net zero pledge, on the NDC, on the National Adaptation Plan, on the low emission long-term development, the green skill needed by the countries, we are not guaranteed that we have it. If you look at in most countries, the training institutions, the vast majority, they are still training with the curriculum that they were doing 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So you have an issue with matching the skill that the countries need in the next 10, 15, 20 years with the ambition that the country have in delivering on the green growth. So the green skill gap is one of the key areas that we need to look at carefully. And that takes me to the last slide. So green skill, green jobs creation, and green entrepreneurship are all linked, but we need to look at the green skill development. So I would like to touch on the last dimension, which is financing. Financing the green transformation of the economies of our member states into a green growth model is going to require a range of specific instruments that we need when it comes to green growth. And one of them is about innovative financing mechanism or instruments. Last year, for example, 2024, we helped mobilize $4.5 billion of green and climate finance for countries. A big part of it was on sustainable finance, both for public and for private. So we don't work for the private sector. We work only for members, for countries. But if working with a private sector can help deliver on the government ambitions, yes, we work with the private sector. But we are a member state organization. So the reason I touch on this one is also about the magnitude of the challenges. Many of you are aware that for the past 8, 9 years, developed economies promise $100 billion per year. They never make it. We are hoping that they will increase, but the likelihood of making it is quite low. But we also know that to deliver on the net pledges, we need to go from the billions to the trillions of dollars. That's what it takes. And government alone cannot make it. We need the private sector. We need the pension fund. We need the capitals where they are available to be used. And that's where it's very important to look at the finance, not from the perspective of only investing, but on the perspective of leveraging. How can we leverage the government's funding to bring more private sector funding? How can we leverage the government funding to bring more funding from pension fund and from other sources? And last not the least, my last slide, carbon finance. For the past few years, we have been developing what we call the carbon market readiness program, mostly for sellers. Because many countries that have carbon credit and they want to sell, they found themselves in a situation, at least the member states for GGGI, when they approached us a few years ago to say at the Council of Ministers meeting, to say they are struggling to be at the same level of negotiations with the buyers. Usually buyers are advanced economies. So finding a way to make the sellers ready, that led to the design of this carbon market readiness program. Currently, globally is the largest that we have. The map is not up to date, but currently it's the largest program that we have with 4 pillars. The first one is on the capacity building. Governments need to own or must own the process of developing their carbon markets. To own that, the capacity development is key. The second one is to have the framework and the policies in place. Sometimes you have the policies with gaps, they need to be updated. Sometimes you have the lack of policies and they need to be developed. And the third one is to work with the governments and the countries to develop the pipeline that is needed for the trading. And the fourth and last one is helping the country to do the transactions. A transaction that is fair to the seller, because quite often the buyers tend to fix the tariff or the rate. But having a transaction, so basically helping the countries to be ready to negotiate and to be ready to have fair transaction. So linking carbon finance to sustainable finance or green bonds issuance is going to be a game changer in the time ahead. So this is one area where you will be hearing a lot in the next couple of days. And the cities, making carbon neutral cities will highly depend on the mobilization of finance. From carbon finance to innovative financing mechanism to funds to sustainable finance, the opportunities are there. When we signed an MOU with the Luxembourg Fund, I will close on this one, my closing remarks. When we signed the cooperation agreement with Luxembourg, the idea was, and I will give you maybe, I will say it differently. With the government of Luxembourg, we took $5 million for a program of 3 years. We took $5 million and we translated into $2.6 billion of green and climate finance mobilized in 18 months, in 9 transactions. $5 million translated into $2.6 billion of finance mobilized for 7 countries in 18 months. In GGGI, we used to say that for every dollars that we use, we mobilize at least 15 times. This one is close to, I believe, it's close to, okay, some of you are very good in math here. But if you do the math, it's not 1 to 15. It's not even 1 to 20 or it's 1 to 40. So for every $, $40 of green investment mobilization. So the reason I'm concluding on this one is to say that mobilizing finance is a challenge, but it's not the most difficult part. Whenever we speak to investors, they will say, we don't have good quality projects. So the pipeline is an issue. But then when we talk to Minister of Finance, or we talk to technical ministries, or we talk to local governments, the issue is that we cannot get the funding. We don't know how to access the funding. So when you bridging that gap is part of the dialogue we have in this forum of RGEF. The message is that it's possible, but it's not moving fast enough. The message is that we have challenges, yes, but we can translate into opportunities. The message is, how do we shift away from too many short-term commitments or short-term planning and having the long-term planning, but with credible short-term, I would say, visibility in terms of what and how we deliver. And the message is that no single government can deliver on the climate or green growth ambitions. We need to come together. It is feasible, it is doable, but it's going to take innovation. I can see somebody in the room who is smiling when I say innovation. It takes innovation, Masamba, and I'm sure you will be conveying that message more. It takes innovation, but it also takes innovation combined with the scale. A $5, $10, $15 million will not make it in a city. Many years ago, we were talking about millions of dollars are not enough. We need to go to billions. And now we know how to mobilize billions of dollars. And we also now, I think we can very confidently say that billions are not enough. We need to go from billions to trillions of dollars. That's what it will take to make the transformation. And combining the fund mobilization with the skill development and the ownership. So the ownership is key. Whatever we do in the cities, they must own it. And that ownership will never, I would say, happen if things are being told to them on what to do and how to do it. They know what they need. They know what the issues are. How can we work together to make sure they own the process, they own the development ambitions, and they look at it from short to long term in terms of credibility? So I would like to close on this one in opening the dialogue, a dialogue in which, I don't know if we have time for question, comments, or I call it dialogue, but I'm closing on the optimism that it is possible. It's not a mission impossible. It is possible to do it. It is possible to do it if we build on the learning. It's possible to do it if we build on the innovation. It's possible to do it if we build on the scale. The scale of the delivery, the scale of the interventions must meet or exceed the magnitude of the issues. Otherwise, it will be difficult. It's already difficult, but it will be even more difficult. Mobilizing funding, no financial institutions is happy to sit on the money. So they need to use the fund. We need to come together to work in a way to have smart policies that we can translate into green growth, or smart policies that we can translate into investment plans, and investment plans that are attractive enough to respond to the demand of the countries, to respond to the demand of the cities, and to create the opportunities for the young generation for job creation, for green entrepreneurship, and for the development of innovative financing mechanisms. Thank you very much for your attention on this understanding carbon neutrality. And sorry if I went off carbon neutrality to talk about other topics. But again, this is a topic I think that is going to guide us in the next few years. For decision makers, it's not about the commitments. The commitment is the easy part. But how do we take the commitment and translate into opportunities? The private sector is very smart. When something works, it makes economic sense, they move fast on it. Let's get them on board. Foundations are there, academia, universities, training institutions, SMEs and MSMEs. Everybody has a role to play, and I think we can make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tankara, for that insightful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to announce two exciting site visits taking place tomorrow on 25th July. First one, a cultural tour in Tangier, offering a chance to explore the city's heritage, and a scientific visit to industrial facility where participants will learn about best practices in sustainable operation. A bus will be arranged and will depart from the hotel entrance at the scheduled time. If you are interested in joining either of these visits, please register at the registration desk as soon as possible. Seats are limited, so we encourage you to sign up early to secure your spot. We now turn to real-world case studies on renewable energy solutions. Please welcome our moderator and key speakers as they discuss successful projects across African cities.
So good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to this very important session focusing on renewable energy solution for cities. So this session will focus on the renewable energy solution for cities aiming to transition toward carbon neutrality. And this morning we said several times the challenge that cities are facing, the fact that now more than half of the world population live in cities, and then to satisfy the needs of the citizen, we need to deliver material, and this has negative impact on several aspects: climate change, loss of biodiversity, land degradation, and use of natural resources beyond planetary boundaries. But we also say that there are a lot of opportunities in cities. This is the best place to conduct some of the most interesting type of climate and sustainability action, such as, for example, the Net Zero Campus. It is clear that if cities do not transition, the planet won't either. So it's important then to find possibility to leverage renewable energy in the best way to serve the transition of cities. To discuss urban renewable energy solution, the World Green Economy Organization has put in place a great panel of experts in the domain. And now I will invite them to join the podium and start the discussion on this matter. So first, Dr. Aisha Almuyemi, please. I would like also to invite Mr. Mohamed Hosseini. Mrs. Nahla Abid. Mr. Tony Tiyum. Monsieur Abderrahim Sri. Mr. Abderrahim Kisri. I think he's also in the room. And Mr. Karim El Asfri. So first of all, thank you again for accepting to join this panel, and we are looking forward to very lively exchange. So the format of this panel, at the beginning, I would like to give you the floor to introduce yourself and what you are doing. And then in a second round of discussion, I will come back to you with some specific questions. So the first round is for you to introduce yourself and maybe present some element of ideas that you would like to share. And then the second round, I will ask questions. And if now time allows, we will give the floor to the public so that they also ask questions. Maybe starting with you, Aisha.
Good evening, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to be part of this regional forum. My name is Aisha Naimi. I am the Director of Sustainability and Innovation Center at Dubai Electricity and Water Authority. I'm also the Global Green Innovation Initiatives Lead at the World Green Economy Organization. My work is mainly focusing on three key pillars: innovation, education, and inspiration. The innovation on accelerating the green technologies and supporting the startups and SMEs. The education by having initiatives and programs that are mainly dedicated to the professionals to gain the skills required to accelerate in the green transition, as well as the youth empowerment, specifically in the field of green technology, and then the inspiration by inspiring people and raising their awareness through the various programs that we are basically leading at the World Green Organization.
Thank you, Aisha, for this introduction. And I will move now to Mr. Hosseini.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. My name is Mohammed Hosseini. I'm the Managing Director of Africa for Hitachi Energy, based out of Johannesburg, South Africa, originally Egyptian. Hitachi Energy is a world leader in electrification, grid expansion, and grid connection when it comes to renewable energy. And I'm here to represent the company to speak about practical and success stories that we were able to execute in the continent as something that to show what can practicality do with the theoretical part, and plus, of course, the maintaining and keeping these assets best performing and getting the benefit out of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohammed. And yeah, Nahla, please.
So good afternoon, everybody. Bonjour. Assalamu alaikum. So my name is Nahla Abid-Griba. I'm Vice President, Strategy, Sales, Marketing, Communication for Bureau Veritas in Middle East, Caspian, Africa. Same as Mohammed, I come from the region. So I'm originally from Tunisia. I lived a while in Europe before relocating in Middle East a few years ago. And basically, I'm supporting our company into implementing our strategy, which is having at its heart sustainability. We do have a big focus into energy transition. I think we have something quite unique because we are not a developer, but we are rather interfering as basically supporting the industry, developing regulation, implementing the right policy, through making certification, inspection, and testing, as well as technical advisory services. And yeah, I think, something quite interesting about us, we've been actually active in all sector of energy. So we've seen as well implementation starting, I would say, from oil and gas, renewable, and we have quite an active role now when we speak about energy transition and about climate neutral, particularly into supporting as well player building their sustainability strategy and going into proper mechanism, also measuring how far they're implementing it.
Thank you, Nahla. Now I will turn to Tony.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. So, salam alaikum, bonjour, hello. So, I'm Tony Tiu. I'm founder and CEO of Renewables in Africa. It's a pleasure for me to be here. So, we are a media platform and also service provider. So, when companies come to us, our job is very simple. It's to make sure that we can help them deploy into the market by giving them three things: visibility, leads, and sales. Because most of the time they come, they want to tap into the African market, they don't know how to do it. We help them do that in a green space, obviously. So beside that, we're also very much supportive, helping company acquiring in the carbon credit scheme, and also brokerage, because we talked about bankable projects. So those bankable projects need investors, those investors need bankable projects. So we sit in the middle, helping that. Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. And Now, Karim.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for the organizers for their invitation. My name is Karim Al-Asafri. I am head of Sustainable Energy Division within the Ministry of Energy Transition and Sustainable Development, Department. So our daily job is to promote and support the development of renewable energy within different sectors throughout mainly the enhancing on regulatory framework and also licensing renewable energy projects. So I'm glad today to be here to share with you what we are doing in the ministry to support the renewable energy deployment in cities and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I would like to come back to Aisha for my first question. And what I would like to do is to ask you, Aisha, to help us paint the future that we would like to build. So first of all, why the effective deployment of urban renewable energy, particularly solar, is so critical for the carbon neutrality in city, and what a fully decarbonized urban environment actually would look like. So you will paint for us the future that we would like to achieve, and then we will back us from that future in our discussion.
Thank you, Masamba. Mainly when we are speaking about cities, they are contributing to approximately 70% of CO2 emission. And this is mainly driven by the various factors such as the buildings, the transportation, and the industries. So with the deployment of renewable energies, and specifically when we are speaking about solar, given that it is one of the most abundant resource of renewable energy in the region, it's important to highlight that those renewable energy projects are providing cost-effective, reliable, and sustainable resource of energy. And to give you some figures, with the implementation of, for example, a 1 megawatt of solar, we are contributing to a reduction of between 1,000 to 1,500 metric tons of CO2. It's like removing 200 to 300 cars from the road. So it's very important to see that renewable energy are really playing a critical role toward reaching the carbon neutral targets. And one of the key examples that I would like to highlight here is Dubai City. Dubai City has already worked on a very clear target to reach 100% renewable energy and clean energy to be powering Dubai City by 2050. And we have very great example that was presented today earlier in this forum. We have the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Solar Park that is currently powering more than 20% of the Dubai electricity today is coming from solar. And as I mentioned, the target is to reach 100% by the year of 2050. When we envision cities in general on how they will be carbon neutral, it's very important to highlight that also not only from the energy side, but also from the transportation, because also there should be effective infrastructure that support the transition toward electric vehicles and e-buses. This is very critical, and this is also has been implemented in Dubai, where we have the green charger initiatives across Dubai City that supported the city, the people in the city to transition toward electric vehicles. So this is in a nutshell about how cities could rely on renewable energy to reach their target.
Well, thank you, Aisha, for painting the future that we would like to build. Now that we have clarity about what that future would look like, we can now talk about the enabler to get there. And we have a broad range of enablers. They could be innovative technology, innovative policy instrument, innovative financial instrument, innovative cooperative approach, capacity building, and also innovative business model. So now I will turn to you, Mohammed. What can be this enabler? Maybe you can address the technological enabler and some of these other enablers that you would like to cover.
Yeah, well, Actually, I would like to highlight two main points here. The first one is that technology is not a bottleneck. Technologies are there, and they are ready to serve the need for a sustainable future. And this is what all the global leaders are working on. The second is that there is this main theme that we are a believer that electricity is going to be the backbone of the entire energy system. So if you look at transportation, which Dr. Aisha just mentioned, it was not on the landscape 10, 15 years ago. It was not part of the equation. Now it's a big part of the equation. If you look at data centers, for instance, data centers is another key and major player in this landscape that we are ready with the technology to serve in a very sustainable and a very important way. And maybe just also to add to this, it's very important to take into account the fact that with the technology related to solar, to wind, to the battery energy storage, expanding and also investing in the grid itself, making it a reliable, smart, and resilient grid is a key factor here to make sure that this sustainability continues in the way that we would like it to be. And this is where the companies like Hitachi Energy steps in and put all the technology to serve these kind of improvements and developments in this landscape.
No, thank you. We have heard several times people saying the technologies that we need for the green transition are already available. So it seems that the main problem that we are facing is the problem of deployment at scale. And maybe this is also related to the fact that technology innovation in isolation cannot facilitate upscale deployment. Innovative technology will need to be combined with other aspects such as innovative financial instrument, innovative business model, capacity building, and so, so that we can not only develop, but also deploy at scale. So I'll move to Nahla. For you, what are the enablers that need to be acted on if we want to not only develop, but also deploy at scale renewable energy?
I think if we start by speaking about innovative technology, we should also speak about innovative technology which is adapted to local need and local resources. So if we take example of solar panel, which has been quite successfully deployed in various parts of Africa, what we see actually that even the technology is the same as solar panel, but we're not using the same coating as example. You go to some areas such as Cape Town, you need to have a special material which is more adapted to marine coating, which can actually survive that condition. If you move rather to the Sahel side, it's more desert condition. So you're having to have some which are more adapted rather to dust, as example. If we move to other side, actually, we have a lot of flooding. It should be rather a mountain structure. And we see it actually even in another part of the region, like the first ever experience of having solar panel built in the Middle East was built actually using the same standard. And here we go back for me as well to the importance of using the right standard. They were using same standard and same model, which are deployed in Europe. So in Europe, we don't have the same condition, the same dust, the same need of cleaning the panel faster, and it was not successful. They adapted that, and the second, I think, plant, which was built by Masdar in that time in UAE, was fully built according, in a way that we have a plant which are really adapted to this dust condition, high temperature condition, and so on. So I think it's not just about availability of technology, but how can I use a technology which is innovative but adapted to what I have? Second part is as well, it's what you have as resources. So we are, I think, in Africa, it's very blessed with various resources. So in some area, you can maximize by combining wind and solar. In some other area, you can maximize by using a micro, I will say, hydropower plants. We have as well a lot of areas which are having a lot of agriculture residue. So in those ones, and we see it a lot in East Africa, as example, in various parts, we are rather moving into bioethanol, biodiesel, like it's into more second generation, I would say, of biofuel, which is very well adapted to what you have in the region. We're having as well various areas, and we see a lot of developing now of waste to energy, which is saving two problems. We have a lot of waste, so we get actually rid of that waste, and in parallel, we generate energy, which can be easily actually adapted and integrated within the microgrid, or what I would say the unofficial grid system as well. And I think another side which is very important and which we tend a bit to forget, it's more the importance of applying the right quality aspect. Like if I'm bringing a technology, I need to make sure that whatever I'm applying, like from performance standard, from quality aspect, it can serve, like I'm first of all applying, of course, whatever is international, but I'm also adapting it to the local context and to the local environment, the local, I would say, need from the community. If the plant is built near a certain community, how can I make sure that the risk is well mitigated as well? And then something which is also very important, and we see a lot of discussion about it in the previous session as well, which is the development of policy and regulation. Am I putting the right permitting system? I think we have someone here who will be speaking about the permitting system. Am I putting actually in place the right structure, which is combining, like if we see it, we have a lot of ministry as example, which are dealing within the energy sector. You will have the environmental ministry, the renewable side, and so on. Am I creating actually structure which is combining all of those aspects within the government to make sure that I'm coming with the right structure as well? And then am I really bringing as well the policy, which are supporting as well, bringing as example international investment? How can I getting access to green funds? How can I getting access to this? Am I building the right public partnership, public-private partnership as example?
No, thank you so much. But because the enabling factors are very important, we need to explore them in an exhaustive manner. Because most of the time, what happens is we act on several, and then we miss one or two, and they become the bottleneck. They is what will prevent to move forward. So let's keep on talking about this enabler. So Tony, can you also tell us your view on what are these enablers that have not been mentioned by the other speakers?
I think in terms of the enablers as well for me, I'm probably going to speak a little bit more from the financial side.
Yes.
And looking at that, I think Dr. Tunkara covered some part of it when initially we talked about the blended finance. I see that for me as a cornerstone of a way to de-risk project that we could take into area where it wasn't able to take finance before. It's all about how do you bring concessional money that you combine with obviously private investment to make sure that you can deploy those projects and make them bankable. It's all about that. That's one aspect of it for me. That is one enabler. So the second aspect, there's also, let's say, financial solution, for example, like pay-as-you-go model. And we've seen a lot of that in East Africa, for example, where by being able to create a mechanism whereby we could match people at the payment that they can make and remove the upfront cost, we were able to significantly raise the uptake of solar. We're talking about here the off-grid system and also solar home system. That was clearly enabled by the pay-as-you-go, which, as you know, started by mobile payment that was enabled by M-Kopa, and then M-Pesa, sorry, then translate into M-Kopa. And it has obviously been able to move that from the off-grid now to the mini-grid and go to street lighting. So pay-as-you-go, it's a model that definitely works. That's another way to, I would say, to enable an environment that allowed us to move forward. So the third example I can talk about as well, it's when you have cities like Dakar or Kampala that are using, piloting municipal green bonds that they were obviously paired with some climate funds in order to raise enough money now to deploy some projects, like for example, a solar rooftop, I believe they did, for schools, for hospitals, also for administrative buildings. So those are, from the financial aspects, what I could see. So basically, the reason what I'm actually saying here is the enabler is not just the technical solution. We also have the financial architecture that you can design to accompany and accelerate those solutions. So that's what I could cover in here. Yeah.
Thank you for all these enablers that you have touched upon. Nous avons le privilège d'avoir aussi dans le panel les politiques, et nous savons que les politiques jouent un rôle extrêmement important. Ça peut être des politiques d'incitation, ça peut être une réglementation, c'est aussi un levier extrêmement important pour faciliter le déploiement à grande échelle des énergies renouvelables. Alors, nous avons dans le panel Karim, qui est au ministère de la Transition écologique et du Développement durable. Quels ont été les efforts déployés par le ministère pour accélérer la transition énergétique?
I will switch to French. So for non-French speaking, please use your micro. Donc merci beaucoup, M. Msamba, pour la question. Donc c'est un plaisir pour moi de partager avec vous les efforts déployés par notre pays à travers le ministère de la Transition énergétique pour accélérer la transition énergétique dans notre pays. Donc l'histoire de la transition énergétique a commencé au Maroc principalement en 2009, l'année de lancement de la stratégie énergétique bas carbone, sous la conduite éclairée de Sa Majesté Mohamed VI, que Dieu l'assiste. Donc cette stratégie, qui est basée sur un triangle très simple, c'est la promotion des ressources locales en matière des énergies renouvelables, le développement de l'efficacité énergétique et aussi l'intégration régionale pour rendre le Maroc un carrefour énergétique régional. Donc cette stratégie, elle prend en considération, bien sûr, les défis confrontés par les centres urbains, notamment les villes, en ce qui concerne l'urbanisation rapide, la demande énergétique croissante et la nécessité de décarboner donc notre écosystème pour soutenir donc un développement urbain qui est inclusif et résilient, en s'appuyant notamment sur les solutions énergétiques durables et locales. Je souligne sur local, sont les solutions locales pour répondre aux besoins des villes et de leur population. Donc, durant ces dernières 15 années, donc, le Maroc, en déployant cette stratégie, donc, a atteint des résultats tangibles. Et nous avons atteint, donc, réalisé en termes de capacité d'énergie renouvelable. Donc, nous avons réalisé plus de 7300 MW a été ajouté à notre système électrique. Donc, 7300 MW ajoutés en total, dont 3660 MW de sources renouvelables, pour un investissement qui dépasse les 66 milliards de dirhams. Donc 66 milliards de dirhams. Donc voilà, donc avec le temps, notre mix énergétique au Maroc est devenu de plus en plus diversifié et vert. Donc en intégrant des solutions d'énergie renouvelable, notamment solaire avec ces deux technologies phares qui sont le CSP et le photovoltaïque, l'éolien et le gaz naturel étant une énergie flexible et considérée comme énergie de transition. Donc à fin juin 2025, nous avons donc un mix avec une capacité totale qui dépasse les 12 000 MW, dont 5 500 MW provient d'énergie renouvelable, soit un taux de 45,5% de capacité installée renouvelable. Donc, en parallèle de ces réalisations-là, et pour répondre aux besoins énergétiques, qui est la mission principale du ministère, donc, nous prenons en considération aussi donc, les orientations qui sont évoquées au niveau de nouveaux modèles de développement élaborés au Maroc en 2021, qui insistent sur des principes importants, à savoir la réduction du coût de l'énergie, la libéralisation responsable du secteur, et ce qui nous intéresse aujourd'hui le plus, c'est la généralisation de l'accès à l'énergie à des prix compétitifs et l'encouragement de la production décentralisée. Donc la production décentralisée des énergies renouvelables et donner l'accès à une électricité compétitive dans tous les territoires. Donc prenons en considération ces éléments-là. Le ministère, en concertation avec les départements concernés, donc, il prévoit un développement massif durant donc, la période à venir 2025-2030. Nous prévoyons donc de multiplier par 4 la cadence d'investissement en matière des énergies renouvelables. Donc, pour dépasser l'objectif fixé pour 2030, à savoir les 52%. En chiffres, donc, notre programme d'investissement, il prévoit la réalisation d'une capacité qui dépasse donc, les 12 gigawatts à partir des énergies renouvelables, avec un investissement de plus de 100 milliards de dirhams. Donc, brièvement, ce sont les efforts. Ces efforts-là, donc, ils traduisent donc, la volonté de notre pays d'opérer une transition énergétique qui est ambitieuse, inclusive et durable, qui fait des énergies renouvelables un levier important pour le développement économique et social de notre pays, tout en répondant donc, efficacement aux défis énergétiques, climatiques et urbains. Merci.
Merci bien et merci pour avoir aussi couvert un point qui est très important, le point de l'accessibilité. Parce que je dis toujours que développer des solutions qui ne sont accessibles qu'à un nombre limité de personnes, ce ne sont pas vraiment des solutions. Nous avons besoin de solutions qui sont accessibles au grand nombre. Parce qu'autrement, on ne peut pas déployer à l'échelle, à grande échelle. So we need to develop solutions that are accessible to the many people. Otherwise, these solutions, we cannot upscale them. They will be just for a limited number of people. Now I turn to the room. If there is a question that you would like to direct to the panelists, introduce yourself, and then share your question, or if you would like also to share a comment. I don't know whether there is a mic in the room that people can use. Otherwise, we'll give them one of our mic. Any question from the room? I do not see anyone asking for the floor.
Can we pick?
Sorry?
Can we pick?
So I'm tempted to come back with just one question and then, oh, okay, please.
Thank you so much. I'm Hekima El Haiti, President of Africa Pact and UN representative of the Advisory Board for Zero Waste. I'm just curious to know, we are talking about renewable energy in Africa, and I would love you to talk about how do you see the energy transition in Africa, because personally I don't see the energy transition in Africa happening like it happens in Europe. And I agree with you. We are not in the process of copy and paste. This is not the case. It will not work in Africa. So we need to work together to clarify what is energy transition. Should we go all together to renewable energy? Because I talked with some leaders and they said we cannot industrialize Africa with renewable energy. I'm not a specialist, so I'm asking you. You are the specialist. Thank you.
Great question. So, who would like to take?
I think, thank you for your question, first of all. I definitely want to jump in that question because, you know, I'm sort of a renewable energy expert. I've been in the sector now for more than 10 years. And I hear this remark on a regular basis saying that Africa cannot industrialize with renewable. And I think it's a fallacy for me. First of all, if we look at, for example, historical fact. So, ever since we've had independence, most of the countries in Africa, 96 years around that, essentially, people don't know that a lot of country actually depends on a source of renewable energy for the power, hydro, basically. I'm talking, for example, I'm from Cameroon, right? We have 60% coming from, of our power come from hydro. Kenya is similar. You have many other countries, right? And with that, we've been able to build the industry that we have. Okay, it's not enough. We need more than that. So that's an example to say, first of all, I don't understand when people are saying that. What they say is you cannot build, you cannot industrial with solar and wind only. But this is not renewables. That's why they have to be very specific. So that clearly is a false argument, basically. And it's not just hydro. You're talking about geothermal. Kenya as well, they have something like 6 gigawatts of geothermal. They've been able to build renewables, the build industry with that. Now, you go back to South Africa, the REAP program. With the REAP program, we have what? Something like 6, 7 gigawatts they've been able to build in 10 years, just feeding the grid. With that as well, obviously, they're able to run the country, and they want more. Even going further, without even going further, look at this country, Morocco. Morocco back in the day used to be very much dependent on fossil fuel import. That is not the case anymore. I think, I can't remember, I think the minister just said that the country is power for the power generation, because obviously clean energy is not just power generation. You also have transport and also heat. But power generation will stop at that. Morocco, they are 45% now relying on renewables, basically, for the power generation. So it is happening. So it's a choice that country needs to make. And I know that in Africa, we have a disconnect between the leaders who tend to be obviously attached to the fossil fuel, example or choice that they are making, and the population which is much more ready, as far as I know, towards to embrace renewable. The reality is here, yes, in Africa, we can't go 100% renewable unless although I'm a renewable guy. We need to have a mix, that's fine. But the argument here is we need a lot more renewable than what we have right now. But we know we're going to be using fossil fuel still for the foreseeable future because we're not the biggest polluter. So it is possible, and usually the question is, should we go energy access or energy transition? Again, for me, it's a false question. We can do both, and countries are doing both. That's what I'm saying. That's why I just wanted to jump at that, because I hear that all the time, and the fact don't support that. Yeah.
Mohamed, you want to add something?
Yeah, I would like to also jump in and say, yeah, it's certainly a mixed bag. And how long has been fossil fuel in the market? 70, 80, 100 years? We still have in Africa 600 million people with no access to electricity. So certainly, fossil fuel did not solve the problems. If it's the only solution, why it did not solve the problem of getting access to more than 600 million people in the continent. So energy transition means to make sure that accessibility to energy and to electricity to the people who are living on this continent is part of it. Hydro is definitely one of the major elements that we can use. One country in Africa, Democratic Republic of Congo, has a potential of 100 gigawatts of hydropower. But what we are doing there, we still have people who has no access to electricity in DRC. So that's the main question that we should all ask ourselves. If energy transition is not the only solution, why we have not been able to solve this problem for years? So definitely energy transition is one of the ways that we can address this: accessibility, urbanization, industrialization of the continent. The continent holds almost 60%, and I'm talking about statistics here, 60% of the world renewable resources. So it would be ridiculous to keep this apart or leave it on the side because we want to use fossil fuel. Again, this does not mean that we abandon fossil fuel totally, but we need to look into what we have as a continent, resources that we own, plus what we also have, because we have very big production of oil, gas in the continent. So we cannot also leave this untapped. So I hope that this addresses at least your concern about this point.
So just if I may add, actually, you're speaking about a transition. And I think it's important to speak about it because you're speaking here about, as mentioned by Mohammed already, there's one more aspect, which is affordability. I think previously when we spoke about energy transition, it didn't really make sense because in a region which is also rich, as you mentioned, by hydrocarbon gas and fuel, it didn't really make sense to start building solar panel, wind, and so on with the prices of the technology as well. Now with the technology becoming much more affordable, And with actually many countries as well, as mentioned as well by Tony here, like other countries such as Kenya as example, we don't have a huge access to hydrocarbon. However, you're having a very nice actually geothermal resources. So it's actually like, what do I have available? Is technology like there to help me actually do it in an affordable price, and how fast can I develop it as well? But I do believe actually, like I'm a big partisan of speaking about it as a transition. You cannot actually move from one day to another, unplug whatever you have and move directly to renewable, because it will affect negatively as well the local communities. The idea is, how can we maximize access to electricity to everybody? How can we maximize the development of industries? And for that, we still would need actually, as example, gas at the beginning. We'll have some time actually to move potentially to hydrogen today. We're not yet fully ready, and so on.
No, thank you. I think it would have been very difficult to close this panel in a better way. Thank you for your question, because it has helped the panelists clarify one important aspect. The energy transition is not about decarbonizing the energy sector. This is about satisfying the needs of the many people, no one being left behind, but doing it in a way that keep human activities within the planetary boundaries. And I think this is exactly what all the panelists have said here. And this is what we call energy transition. It's not just about decarbonizing, but it's also satisfying the needs in terms of energy. So I would like to ask you to give a round of applause to our panelists for their great interaction. And with this, I close the session. Thank you.
Thank you to our speakers and moderator for that insightful discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now break for lunch and prayers. So lunch will be served. For those who wish to pray, our colleagues and organizers will be available to guide you to the prayer rooms and assist you with the direction to the lunch area. So please return at, it should be 2 p.m., but I believe like 3 p.m. for our next session on sustainable transportation. Thank you.